Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on Service Operations Management. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concept of call center operations, the learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by the call center and what are the various activities that have been conducted at the call center and what are the various call center operations that has been undertaken in a certain organization. We'll be learning the importance of a call center operations and we'll be also understanding what are the various call center operations activities that have been conducted in an organization. And lastly, what are the various factors that affect the call center operations. Now let's begin with our learning. The call center activity. So a call center activity is or call center service is a center which is having a certain representative of managing a company's inbound and outgoing incoming clients calls. So here in this case, what is the consideration that we have to understand is a call center is a certain operational activity in which a particular representative is appointed in a certain organization in order to deal with the ingoing and outgoing calls in a certain organization. In an organization, the incoming calls may be related to the customers, may be related to the vendors, may be related to the suppliers, and so on. The outgoing calls may be related again to the customers for effective product delivery, information about the product and services, and so on. And hence, in order to see that the incoming and outgoing calls activity of a particular product or a certain commodity or a certain activity is being undertaken in a very effective way, the call center operation is essentially required. And hence, the particular person or a representative who is in charge of conducting those particular activity is called a call center operator. These particular people serve as the company's frontline executives who are dealing with the issues that have been related to either to the product complaint, the payment difficulties, the support request, and so on. So there may be various considerations in a certain organization about which activities needs to be completed or which activity is having a certain problem. The customer may face a certain problem with respect to payment, with respect to the product, with respect to the services, with respect to the support that has been required, that is an additional service that needs to be delivered, after sales or a post sales service, and so on. So for those particular consideration, the customers respectively contact the call center, and accordingly the one has to see that whatever call that has been received at the call center is being attended properly and they have been answered, and accordingly the issues are being dealt with in a proper concern. Now let's understand what is the role of call center operations. So in terms of call center operations, the customer service associate or a sales representative has to see that he manages properly whatever calls that have been received, whatever emails that he has been receiving, and accordingly, whatever live chat, that is a chatbot message with respect to a window or a certain portal is available, whatever questions or the queries that have been posted on the chatbot, all those particular queries are being answered. Simultaneously, the queries which has been received either via text message, that is an SMS, or a support request for a business concern are being forwarded and directed to a customer support executives, and accordingly they carry certain operations in solving those problems or the assistances. The next concern that one has to, or the role that the call center operations has to perform is they has to handle the wide range of calls within a certain day. These particular calls that have been received may be of several numbers. That is, it may be around 100, 200, 500, 1000, and so on. So every call that has been received or that has been received by a certain call center with respect to a certain customer should be attended. It should be addressed in a very positive approach, and accordingly, the assistance to the consumer should or the customer should be provided very effectively. The problems may be related to the day-to-day activities, may be related to the product, may be related to the billing or the payment concerns, and so on. So the call center should provide the solutions to these particular problems in a very sophisticated way, and always should try to see that whatever complaint that is being raised by an individual is being addressed in a very effective way and it is being solved in a better concern. So that's the concern of how do we solve a particular complaint. Now let's understand what are the various skill sets that need to be possessed by the call center representatives. Number one, knowledge of the industry trend. So the particular salesperson or the representatives who are at the call centers should always have the knowledge of what is going on, what is the industry trend that is into existence. The industry trend as to the performance of a certain product, the various product service offerings that have been given by the organization, what are the various inputs that needs to be taken out as to how the product is beneficial or fruitful to the consumer, what are the various information that has been related about the contents of a certain product, and so on. So That's the concern of knowledge of industry trends. Access to the right technology. So, a sales representative or a call center representative must have a proper access to the right technology. That is, when a customer asks for a specific problem or when he says a certain issue has been arising, then accordingly, the right technological approach should be given and the technique or the particular query should be routed to the right people. And hence, use of technology should be effectively into existence and accordingly, right technology will be only able to understand and deal with how the service can be delivered to the consumer in a very better and effective way. Benchmarking and KPI. Benchmarking is a particular concern wherein a skill set as to the call center representatives is essentially required. The communication that is being undertaken, the way in which the process or activity is being handled, and accordingly how the communication with the individual customer is done also sets a certain benchmark. And last, secondly, the KPI, that is key performance indicators, also plays an important role in identifying which problem or which assistance is to be given a certain priority and within what duration the problem needs to be resolved and how it needs to be addressed. The next skill set that one needs to possess is understanding of why and how to empower. So, empowering of the organization, empowerment of a customer by providing the value and qualitative services is essentially required. And hence, a call center representative should be able to understand why and which type of services needs to be delivered, how those particular services can be delivered to a certain individual, and the customer can ultimately get satisfied and happy. And hence, empowering the customer in understanding what the actual problem is and how that particular problem can be solved in a very effective and a better way is also essentially required. The next perspective or a skill set is employee empowerment. So along with the call center representatives, the managers in the call center organization should always try to see that how do they empower their employees. So a proper communication, a proper channel and a proper motivation activities needs to be undertaken, which also empower the employees. At certain stages or certain point of time, you may receive or a call center representatives may receive certain negative feedbacks or a negative response from a certain consumer. So in this particular case, the boosting the morale of the employees is essentially required, and accordingly, the empowerment of employees as to providing certain leisure time, certain concern as to a certain part of an participation or a normal activity should not be undertaken, and accordingly, the morale of the employees should be boosted. Delegating the responsibilities. So, as a function of a management, the responsibilities in a particular call center should be delegated and should be divided between different people. That is, a particular junior associate, a particular senior associate, a experienced person, a technical person, a sales representatives, and so on. So, accordingly, delegation of responsibility is essentially required in order to bring in a more effective or more management skills and techniques in the organization. The real-time access to the customer history. So whenever a particular representative is been associated a certain call center, the various customer history or the details of the customer should be provided to a certain individual, and accordingly, the real-time access to a certain situation should be given to a consumer. And hence, skill set that needs to be provided by a certain call center also focuses on how much do you know about your consumer or the customer. So, ultimate information of the customer is essentially required, and hence, based on those particular perspectives, the call center activities are being undertaken. And lastly, technically monitoring and call monitoring. So accordingly, tech monitoring is essentially with respect to what technology are we using, what is the effectiveness of that particular technology, how that particular technology will be helpful to solve the problem and assist the customer at the early stage, and how the call monitoring activity is being undertaken. That is, how do we speak, how do we respond, how do we react to a certain customers, and accordingly, in what way the customer problem is being handled. So these are the various skill set that one has to consider while possessing a certain responsibility position in a call center. Now let's understand what are the various steps for the call center transformation. For a call center transformation, there are various steps that one needs to undertake. Number one that one needs to follow is customer research. So customer research is always invaluable and should be should be undertaken to inform all the call center decisions. So whatever decision that has been undertaken with respect to a certain call or a certain query of a certain consumer, the customer research is essentially important. That is, what are the various frequent or common problems that have been associated with the consumer and how those particular common problems can be addressed in an early stage. So and those particular problems are always of an invaluable concern, wherein whatever input that has been given by a certain customer or a consumer are always valuable to the organization, and it cannot be valued as to in the monetary terms, and hence the feedback from the customer or the insight that the customer is providing is essentially important. The next step for call center transformation is receiving and analyzing the feedback first and then adjusting your operations accordingly. So in order to see that our call center is running very effectively and there is a social and digital transformation into the call center, one has to receive and analyze the feedback in a very effective way. So for those particular consideration, the information that is needed to be collected from the customer should be very effective. It should be analyzed in a better way, and accordingly, the feedback from the customer should be recorded. When all those particular sequence of activities are being performed, then accordingly we should plan as to how the operational activities can be conducted, and they can be planned as to the service delivered to us. The service delivery can be offered to a customer or to a certain client. Being deliberate in your own use of resources. So whatever resources that an organization has been using, either with respect to the money, either with respect to the budget, either with respect to the cost and time and so on, all those particular resources should be effectively used, and those particular resources should be utilized in a better way or in a better concern in an organization. And hence, deliberate and optimum use of resources is essentially required, and those particular resources should be used in a proper concern in an organization. Now let's understand what are the four primary strategies to improvise the operations. Number one, the first strategy that can be undertaken to improvise the strategies in the business organization is conducting a regular A/B testing to fine-tune your customer service experience. That is alpha, beta, or uncertain option testing. So conducting the regular testing is for the customer service approach or a customer service experience is essentially required, and accordingly one must try to test and see that whatever services that we are trying to provide, whether they are effective, whether they are implementable, whether they are acceptable, and whether they are conducting their activities in an effective format or not. So conducting the regular testing activity is essentially required. Collecting the feedback. So whenever we deliver a certain amount of product or a certain service to a consumer, it is essentially to see that what is the feedback that has been received by a certain consumer. Based on a certain feedback, which can be either a positive or which can be either negative, one can come to a certain conclusion as to what revisions or modifications in the customer service delivery can be undertaken. And hence, collecting the feedback from the respective agents is essentially important in order to see that what training or additionally inputs that can be provided either to the organization, either to the employees, or the improvisation in the product or the service that needs to be undertaken. The next third strategy that can be implemented is encouraging the dialogue between the team leaders and the agents to brainstorm the creative solution for the ongoing issues. So certain dialogue and the conversation activities between the employees and the senior level management or the team leaders should be undertaken in order to see that there is a proper brainstorming on a certain activity or on a certain process or on a certain problem, and accordingly the solution as to a common platform can be created, and it can provide a benefit concern to the organization as well as to the consumer. The last strategy that can be implemented is ensuring a crisis management and a disaster management recovery into place. So this particular strategy focuses on if a certain condition changes or if there are ups and downs in a particular economy or a certain organization, then how those particular strategies can be implemented as to in what way the situation can be handled and a certain ups and downs in the economy can be managed. There are various concerns with respect to the disaster management and the crisis management which is into existence. That is, at a certain stage, a product may perform well or a product may not perform well. So in those particular cases, if the strategy is not working, if the product is not performing or giving its output or desired results, then accordingly, how those disaster management techniques can be implemented and the customer can be saved from the various crashes. These particular disruptions or crashes may be related to the weather, may be related to the cyber concerns, and so on. And hence, the strategy as to improvising the operational activities is essentially required, and those strategies must be implemented in a business organization. Now let's understand what is the structure of call in a particular call center. So for the structure of a call center is number one, that is opening the call. So initially when a call arrives at the agent and whenever the agent picks up a certain call, initially what the agent has to do is he needs to greet a particular customer. That is greeting in terms of a particular time duration. That is, may it be a good morning, maybe it a good afternoon, or maybe it a good evening. So in those particular consideration, the customer should be greeted in a very effective way, and accordingly, the call center representatives should introduce themselves. That is XYZ, that is who is the person who is speaking on a particular call and how he can assist that particular customer, the call body. So here in this case, now it's the time of the customer to speak, and accordingly, or the particular agent, if you are making a certain call, it is the agent who is going to speak. So accordingly, whenever the greeting or the opening of the call has been undertaken, now there is a pass on of a message of a primary importance or of a greater importance, wherein for what purpose the call has been undertaken. So here in this case, if the customer is giving you a certain call, then accordingly we must patiently listen to that particular customer and accordingly understand what are the various issues that he's been facing and how those particular issues can be addressed. So accordingly, proper listening skills needs to be applied here very effectively, and accordingly one must listen to the problems or the issues with the customer very effectively. And lastly, the third step is closing the call. So before closing the call, one should always try to assist and pacify the customer that this particular service or the particular product or the assistance that has been required is ultimately valuable to this particular call center or the organization, and the customer should be rest assured that the query or the problem will be solved at an early stage. And hence, before the closing of a certain call, certain assurance or the certain freedom or the certain assistance to the customer should be provided in a positive way, which will make him feel that his problem or the query will be solved in a very effective way or at a better concern. Next thing is, before ending a particular call, again, the greeting to the customer should be provided and a proper follow-up message, which along with the wrap-up of a particular call with a add-up note should be undertaken with the help of either the oral communication that has been undertaken or from a computerized system which has been implemented in a certain organization. And hence, with a word such as thank you, the call should be ended and accordingly, closing of call activity can be undertaken. Now let's understand what is a call center team. The components of the various call center teams are the contact center agent, that is the team leader, the workforce management, that is the lead manager, the quality management team, the management information system, that is MIS team that is into existence, and lastly, the contact center manager. So these are the various call center teams or the participants of the call center at every level, that is which may be divided as the top level management, middle level management, and low level management within a certain department or a certain organization of the call center. Initially, the call center agent or the sales representative is at the focus of the group of a certain call center agents. We have a certain team leader. Along with the particular team leader, there is a lead manager or a workforce management who is looking after the deployment of a certain activities or a certain portfolios. The quality management team focuses on the various communication skills, verbal skills of a certain individual, and accordingly, so as per the need and requirement, various communications as to the product management is being undertaken, and the quality management exercises are being implemented. The management information system. With respect to the management information system, various technical formalities are being complied, and accordingly, those particular systems are being implemented in a certain organization. And lastly, the contact center manager. So the contact center manager is the lead manager in a certain organization, and he looks after all the activities that have been undertaken in the call center. Now let's understand what are the various outcomes that guide the customer service engagements. So the various outcomes that guide the customer service engagements are the customer centric approach. Always the approach of the customer or of the call center or the sales representatives should be always customer centric. So keeping the customer at the center or the focal point, one should always try to see that how those activities are being performed in a certain organization and how maximum or the utmost benefit or the assistance to the customer is being provided in order to see that he is happy, satisfied, and the deal is being closed in a very effective way. The performance driven. Always, whenever a certain call or a certain complaint is been received by a certain customer, one should try to aim and he should try to see that always the activity should be performance driven. That is, it should always try to aim to solve a certain problem, and accordingly, the problems should be solved in a certain organization as to how those problems and the measures can be undertaken to solve those particular issues. The next or the last concern is the concept of result orientation. So accordingly, a proper track record is needed to be required to be maintained about how the or what are the various activities that have been conducted in certain organization and what are the various actions that have been initiated. So based on a certain complaint that was being raised by a certain consumer, what are the various activities that have been undertaken, whether the query or the problem is being solved or it is not being solved, and what is the end result. That is, whether the customer is satisfied or whether the customer is not satisfied, whether the task is being completed or whether the task is not being completed, and if any problem has been arised, how or in what way the problem is being solved. So, in a certain conclusion, we can understand at these particular stages, always the customer call center or a customer call center service that has been delivered is a interactive voice response, which is also called as an IVR system, in which there is an exchange of voice responses between one people or more, two or more people, wherein one person is needing a certain point of assistance, and the another person is providing him certain assistance as to how his particular problem or query will be solved. And hence, it may be a part of an automated system or it may be part of an non-automated, that is a human assistance based system. Originally, the call centers were only intended to manage the incoming and the outgoing phone calls. But now, today, in the modern scenario, those particular activities are being conducted beyond the phone calls also. And it does not restrict to the only for incoming and outgoing of a certain calls. The call center also has to adjust their technologies and advancements with respect to a certain individual, with respect to the product, with respect to the services, with respect to the contractual companies, and so on. So, accordingly, the customer relationship or creating the brand image of organization is been ultimately developed with the effectiveness of call center into existence. And lastly, the concept of client communication needs to be undertaken in a very effective way. This particular communication may be either on a telephone, that is a phone call or a particular mobile number, or it can be on a perspective of an email, or it can be through a part of a social media, or it can be a chatbot which is available on a web portal. So accordingly, any type of assistance can be there into existence, and accordingly, such type of portals or the assistance should be provided to a customer, and accordingly, the service delivery should be very effective. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by the call center operations, what are the various activities that have been performed under the call center operations, and lastly, what are the benefits of a call center operations that have been there in a certain organization. I hope you must have enjoyed your learning at this particular stage. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you.